I had been teaching at the Galactic Academy for 3 solar cycles, and I thought I had seen everything. Galaxians who could barely hold a plasma cutter without fainting. Quilmari students who refused to touch anything sharper than a rounded datapad. Heck, I once had a plebeian who literally shed his outer membrane at the mere mention of combat training, but never in all my years of instructing Survival Tactics 301 had I encountered anything quite like the human. Her name was Maya Kowalski, and she sat in the 3rd row with her legs crossed, chewing on something called gum, that she assured me was not a biological weapon. Next to her sat her companion, a towering creature from her homeworld, that she casually referred to as Bruno. The thing looked like it could tear through reinforced hull plating with its bare claws, all rippling muscle and predatory grace covered in sleek tan fur with darker markings. Bruno was, according to Maya, a dog, specifically a Belgian Malinois, a pet. The fact that humans kept apex predators as companions should have been my first warning sign, but I digress. "All right, class," I announced, my ventral flaps rippling with what I hoped projected authority. "Today marks the beginning of your final project for this term. You will be constructing a basic survival tool using only materials found in the wilderness simulation chamber. No technology, no fabricators. Just you, your wits, and whatever resources the environment provides." A nervous chittering swept through the classroom. Exloth, a nervous centaurian in the front row, raised one of his 7 appendages. "Professor Varnix, when you say tool, do you mean something like, perhaps, a shelter component? Or maybe a water collection device?" "I mean a weapon," I said flatly. The room erupted into panicked squeals and gasps. Someone in the back, I think it was Preela, actually fainted. Her gelatinous form made a disturbing splat sound against the floor. Only Maya seemed unbothered. In fact, if I was reading human facial expressions correctly, and after 3 years I liked to think I was getting better at it, she looked almost excited. Her mouth had curved upward in that expression they called a smile, though on a species with such prominent canine teeth it looked decidedly threatening. Bruno's tail began moving in rapid side-to-side motions. Something Maya had explained meant the creature was happy. Happy. About weapons construction, of course. "Professor," called out Zinthara, a melodian whose crystalline vocal structure always made her sound vaguely musical, "is this not against Academy regulations? The construction of violent implements is strictly prohibited under Section 42. Subs. This is a survival course," I interrupted, perhaps more sharply than intended. "In survival situations you may need to defend yourselves, hunt for food, or create tools for basic needs. The ability to fashion a rudimentary weapon is an essential skill. Besides, this is a controlled educational environment. Emphasis on control." I glanced at Maya as I said this. She had stopped chewing her gum and was staring at me with those unsettling binocular eyes that humans possessed. Predator eyes. Forward-facing. Built for tracking. She winked at me. Actually winked. I felt my chromatic sacs flush purple with alarm. "You will have 3 standard hours in the simulation chamber," I continued, trying to regain my composure. "The environment is modeled after a Class M planet with temperate forest conditions. You may work alone or in pairs. Your weapon will be evaluated based on creativity, functionality, and practical application. Any questions?" "Yeah." Maya raised her hand lazily. "Can Bruno help me?" I looked at the beast sitting beside her. It was currently engaged in licking its own hindquarters with absolutely zero self-consciousness. "I suppose your companion may accompany you, though I fail to see how it would be of assistance." Maya's smile widened. "Oh, you'd be surprised what a good dog can do, Professor." Something about the way she said that made my secondary stomach clench. 20 minutes later I found myself observing the students through the monitoring station as they scattered throughout the simulation chamber. The environment was convincing enough to fool most species into thinking they were actually outdoors, complete with synthesized sunlight, ambient sounds, and an impressive variety of plant life. Most of my students were proceeding exactly as expected. Galoth had found a nice heavy rock and was attempting to attach it to a stick with some vine. It was crude but showed basic understanding of leverage principles. Preela, having recovered from her earlier fainting spell, was weaving together some flexible branches into what looked like it might eventually become a very sad club. Zenthara had given up entirely and was sitting on a log, humming a mournful tune about her impending failure. Then there was Maya. I zoomed the monitoring system in on her position and felt all 3 of my hearts skip simultaneously. She was moving through the forest with Bruno like they were one organism. The dog ranged ahead, its nose to the ground, clearly tracking something. Maya followed behind, her movements unnervingly quiet for a bipedal species. She had rolled up the sleeves of her academy uniform and tied back her head hair in what she called a ponytail. "What you looking at, Professor?" came a voice behind me. I nearly jumped out of my dermal layer. It was Kessa, my teaching assistant, a young Relixian whose curiosity often exceeded her sense of personal boundaries. "The human," I muttered, gesturing at the screen. "She has not even begun constructing anything. She is just wandering around with her predator. Maybe she is gathering materials," Kessa suggested helpfully. We watched as Maya stopped suddenly. Bruno had frozen mid-step, one paw raised, his entire body rigid. His ears, those mobile auditory organs, swiveled forward. Maya crouched low, placing one hand on the dog's back. "What is she doing?" I whispered, even though they could not possibly hear me. Then Maya moved. Fast. Faster than I had ever seen her move in the academy halls. She sprinted toward a small clearing, Bruno exploding forward beside her. There was a flash of movement too quick for me to process. And then Maya was standing upright again. Holding something in her hands, I enhanced the image. She was holding a rabbit analog, one of the simulation chamber's programmed fauna. It was still kicking. "Oh my stars," Kessa breathed. "Did she just hunt something?" "With her bare hands?" "No," I said slowly, watching the playback. "The dog flushed it out. She caught it." Maya was speaking to the creature in her hands, her mouth moving, though we had no audio in this section. Then, with a quick, efficient motion that I almost missed, she twisted its neck. It stopped moving. Kessa made a small distressed sound. "They are persistence hunters," I heard myself saying, my voice distant. "Humans." I read the xenobiology reports. They used to chase prey for hours, days even, until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. They did not have venom or claws or armored hides. They just kept coming, never stopping, never giving up. The prey would run until their bodies failed them. "That is horrifying," Kessa whispered. "That is effective," I corrected. On screen, Maya was doing something with the rabbit's body. She had produced a small blade from somewhere. I made a mental note to confiscate that later, and was methodically processing the animal. Her movements were practiced, confident. Bruno sat nearby, watching with what I was beginning to recognize as the infinite patience of a trained predator. "She is not building a weapon," Kessa said suddenly. "She already has one." "The dog." I considered this. "No. Look at what she is collecting." Maya had set aside the rabbit meat and was now gathering specific plants. Long, straight saplings, flexible green wood. She tested each one, bending it, examining it with those calculating predator eyes. She rejected more than she kept. Then she found what she was looking for. It was a young ash tree analog, maybe 2 meters tall and relatively straight. She spent 5 minutes examining it from every angle before nodding to herself. Using her illicit blade, she began cutting it down. "A spear," I realized. "She is making a spear." Kessa looked at me blankly. "What is a spear?" Of course. Most species had moved past such primitive weapons millennia ago, once they discovered metallurgy and energy weapons. But humans had used spears for hundreds of thousands of their years. It was embedded in their evolutionary memory. "A pointed stick," I explained, "for throwing or thrusting. One of the oldest weapons in their arsenal." "But that seems so simple," Kessa protested. "Surely others will create more complex weapons." I pointed at the screen where Maya was now stripping the bark from her selected sapling with quick, precise cuts. "Watch." What followed was a masterclass in primitive weapon crafting that I suspected most weapons engineers in the galaxy could not replicate. Maya worked with absolute focus, her hands moving with the kind of muscle memory that spoke of previous experience. She shaped the wood, using her knife to sharpen one end to a vicious point. Then she did something I did not expect. She moved to her small fire. I had not even noticed her starting a fire. How long had I looked away and began heating the sharpened point, slowly rotating it in the flames. "Fire hardening," I murmured. "She is carbonizing the tip to make it harder." Bruno had wandered off and returned with a stick, which Maya absently threw for him while waiting for her spear point to harden. The dog retrieved it with what appeared to be profound joy and brought it back. She threw it again, and again. They were playing. In the middle of a survival exercise, this human and her apex predator companion were playing fetch. I felt a laugh building in my thorax and had to suppress it. The absurdity was almost too much. When the spear point had hardened sufficiently, Maya withdrew it from the fire and examined it critically. She tested the balance, holding it at different points along its length. Then she spent another 10 minutes using her blade to create small notches along the shaft for better grip. The final product was elegant in its simplicity. A straight wooden shaft, approximately 1.8 meters long, with a fire-hardened point that looked like it could punch through light armor. The grip area was carefully textured, and the balance appeared perfect. Maya stood, hefted the spear and smiled. Then she threw it. The spear sailed through the air in a perfect arc, and embedded itself in a tree trunk, 20 meters away with a solid thunk that I could hear even through the monitoring system. Impossible. Kessa breathed. That distance, that accuracy. Humans, I said, still watching Maya jog over to retrieve her spear, Bruno bounding along beside her, are persistently, aggressively, terrifyingly good at killing things from a distance. It is their entire evolutionary strategy. Maya pulled the spear free from the tree, inspected the point for damage, and nodded with satisfaction. Then she checked the time on her wrist device, and began walking back toward the exit point. She had completed the assignment in 90 minutes. With time to spare for playing with her dog, the remaining hour and a half was spent watching my other students struggle with their projects. Ixlot's rock kept falling off his stick. Prila's sad club had somehow become even sadder. Synthara had progressed from humming to full-on lamenting her fate in three-part harmony. When the time finally expired and the students filed back into the classroom, Maya was the picture of casual confidence. She leaned her spear against her desk, gave Bruno a scratch behind his ears, and popped another piece of gum into her mouth. The other students stared at her weapon with expressions ranging from awe to abject horror. Right then, I said, trying to maintain some semblance of professorial dignity, let us begin the presentations. Who would like to go first? Every hand except Maya's shot up. They all wanted to present before her. I realized they did not want to follow the humans' demonstration. Smart. I called on Ixloth first. He nervously brought his rock on a stick to the front of the class, and explained his thought process. It was adequate. Functional if crude. I gave him a passing grade and some feedback on his knot work. Several other students followed. The weapons ranged from acceptable to barely functional. One student had somehow created what he claimed was a boomerang but looked more like a bent twig that would fly exactly nowhere. Finally, inevitably, I had to call on Maya. She stood, grabbed her spear and walked to the front of the class with Bruno padding along beside her. The dog sat when she stopped, his posture alert but relaxed. So, Maya began, holding up her spear. This is a spear. Humans have been making these for about 400,000 years, give or take. It is basically a pointy stick, but like the really good kind of pointy stick. I heard Kessa snort behind me, trying not to laugh. The design is simple, Maya continued, warming to her subject. Straight shaft for stability and reach, fire-hardened tip for penetration and durability, textured grip for control. The length gives me leverage and keeps threats at a distance, and before anyone asks, yes, I can throw it accurately up to about 30 meters, further if I really need to, but it is so primitive, Sloth ventured nervously. Surely in a real survival situation you would want something more advanced. Maya's smile was sharp. In a real survival situation, the best weapon is the one you can make with what you have on hand. I can make one of these in under 2 hours with a rock and some patience. Can you fabricate a plasma rifle in the wood? Aloth went very quiet. Plus, Maya hefted the spear, demonstrating its balance. This thing is versatile. Weapon, walking stick, lever, probe for testing ground or water, fish spear if I modify it a bit, cooking spit in a pinch. One tool, multiple uses. That is efficient survival. I found myself nodding. The human made excellent points. And Bruno? I asked, curious despite myself. What role does your companion play in your survival strategy? Maya looked down at the dog, genuine affection in her expression. Bruno is trained for protection and tracking. He can smell things I cannot, hear things I cannot, and honestly, he is just good company when things get rough. Humans evolved alongside dogs. We kind of work better together. Bruno's tail thumped against the floor as if agreeing. Demonstrate the spear's functionality, I requested. Maya nodded and turned toward the reinforced practice dummy at the side of the classroom. She took 3 steps back, measured the distance with her eyes and threw. The spear flew true, embedding itself in the dummy's center mass with enough force to punch clean through and protrude out the back. The class erupted in shocked gasps. Maya walked over, yanked the spear free with one hand, and returned to the front of the room. Any questions? Silence. Absolute terrified silence. I cleared my throat. Excellent work, Maya. Full marks. You may return to your seat. As she passed my desk, she leaned in slightly and whispered, "You know, Professor, if you ever want to learn how to throw, I would be happy to teach you. Might be useful if the Academy ever faces, I don't know, an actual survival situation." Before I could respond, she was back at her desk giving Bruno another treat from her pocket. The rest of the class proceeded without incident, though nobody's presentation could possibly compare to what we had just witnessed. When the final student finished, I dismissed them all with instructions to submit their written reports by next week. Maya was the last to leave, her spear slung casually over one shoulder. Bruno trotted beside her, his tail still wagging, completely unbothered by the fact that his human had just casually demonstrated why her species used to be the most feared hunters on their planet. As the door slid shut behind them, Kessa turned to me with wide eyes. "Professor, are all humans like that?" I thought about the question carefully. According to the files, she is actually considered quite average by human standards. There are humans who are far more skilled at combat and survival. Kessa's chromatic patches paled to nearly white. "That is terrifying." "Yes," I agreed, staring at the spear-shaped dent in my practice dummy. "Yes, it is. But also, I had to admit, it was impressive. Humans were primitive in many ways. Their technology centuries behind most of the galaxy. But they had something that many species had lost in their rush toward advancement. They remembered how to survive, how to adapt, how to create something deadly from nothing but wood and fire and will, and they did it all with a smile and a piece of gum." I made a note in my personal log. Never underestimate a human, especially one with a well-trained dog. It seemed like good advice for anyone hoping to survive in this galaxy. Though as I watched Maya through the hallway cameras, laughing at something Bruno did and absolutely radiating the casual confidence of an apex predator who knew exactly what she was capable of, I could not help but wonder, what would a human do if they actually tried to be scary? I decided I did not want to find out. The next class session started normally enough, which should have been my first clue that disaster was imminent. Maya arrived exactly on time, Bruno at her heel, and took her usual seat in the third row. She had brought what appeared to be a thermal container filled with a dark liquid she called coffee, which she had once explained was a stimulant beverage that humans consumed in absurd quantities. The smell alone made my olfactory sensors burn. The other students filed in with considerably less enthusiasm. Word had apparently spread about Maya's spear demonstration, and now half the academy was whispering about the human who could turn a tree into a lethal weapon in under 2 hours. Ixloth kept stealing nervous glances at her. Preela had requested a seat change to the opposite side of the room. Only Zinthara seemed unfazed, though her species communicated primarily through musical vibrations, and I suspected she had not fully grasped the implications of last week's events. "Good morning, class," I began, my ventral flaps arranged in what I hoped was an encouraging pattern. "Today we will be discussing practical applications of the weapons you constructed. Specifically, we will be analyzing various survival scenarios and determining how your tools would function in each situation." I pulled up a holo display showing a dense jungle environment. Scenario 1. You are stranded on a Class N planet with aggressive megafauna, limited visibility due to vegetation density, high humidity, frequent precipitation. How do you use your weapon to ensure survival? Ixloth raised an appendage tentatively. "I would use my club to defend myself if attacked." "Adequate," I said, though we both knew his rock on a stick would probably fall apart at first impact. "Anyone else?" Maya took a long sip of her coffee before speaking. "Depends on the megafauna. Are we talking ambush predators or pursuit hunters? Pack animals or solitary? What are their sensory capabilities?" I blinked at her. "Let us say pursuit hunters. Pack animals. Excellent sense of smell, but poor eyes. Then I would set up defensive positions in elevated areas where they cannot reach me easily," Maya said, as casually as if she were discussing the weather. "Use the spear to create distance between me and threats. If they hunt in packs, I would focus on injuring the alpha or most aggressive individual to discourage the others. Predators generally avoid fights where they might get injured because an injury means they cannot hunt effectively." Bruno, as if to emphasize this point, yawned widely, displaying an impressive array of teeth. "You have given this considerable thought," I observed. "My dad used to take me camping in places where there were actual dangerous animals," Maya explained. "Bears, mountain lions, occasionally aggressive moose. You learn to think defensively pretty quick when a 300-kilogram animal decides you look interesting." Kessa, who had been taking notes, stopped writing and stared at Maya. "Your parental unit took you to locations with hostile megafauna? Voluntarily? For recreation?" "Yeah. It is called wilderness camping, Maya said, grinning. Builds character. Also teaches you which berries will kill you and which ones just make you wish you were dead. I decided to move on before the class descended into complete panic about human child-rearing practices. Scenario 2, I announced, changing the holo display to show an Arctic wasteland. Frozen tundra. Sub-zero temperatures. Limited food sources. Your weapon must serve multiple purposes beyond combat. This time several students offered suggestions. Prila mentioned using her club to break through ice for water. Saloth suggested his rock could be used to crack open frozen provisions. Santhara hummed something about using resonant frequencies to detect hollow spaces beneath snow. Maya listened to all of this, absently scratching behind Bruno's ears. When there was a pause, she spoke up. The spear becomes even more useful in Arctic conditions, she said. You can use it to test ice thickness before walking on it, probe snow for hidden crevasses, and if you are near water it makes an excellent fish spear. You can also plant it in the ground and drape emergency shelter material over it to create a basic windbreak. And if you are really desperate you can use it as a splint for broken bones. Those are all excellent points, I admitted. But what about the cold itself? How does your weapon help with temperature regulation? Maya's expression turned slightly mischievous. Well, technically speaking, that is what Bruno is for. Excuse me? I said. Dogs have been cold weather survival companions for humans for thousands of years, Maya explained. In extreme conditions people would sleep with their dogs for warmth. There is actually an old expression, a three-dog night, which refers to how cold it is based on how many dogs you need to stay warm. I looked at Bruno, who was currently attempting to scratch an itch on his back by rolling on the floor with absolutely zero dignity. That creature generates sufficient heat to keep you alive? I asked skeptically. Absolutely. His resting body temperature is about 38.5 degrees Celsius. Plus he is basically a mobile furnace wrapped in fur. In survival situations a good dog is worth their weight in thermal blankets. Bruno, having successfully scratched his itch, returned to sitting beside Maya, his tail wagging. The image of this beast as a living heater was somehow both absurd and entirely plausible. Moving on, I said, switching to the next scenario. Desert environment. Extreme heat during day cycles. Extreme cold at night. Water scarcity is your primary concern. Limited shade. Discuss strategies. This scenario generated less enthusiasm from the class. Desert survival was notoriously difficult, and most of their weapons offered little advantage in such conditions. Maya, however, leaned forward with interest. Okay, so desert survival is actually all about water management and heat regulation, she began. The spear helps because you can use it to dig for water in dried riverbeds where moisture might be trapped underground. You can also use it to kill venomous creatures from a safe distance, which is important because desert planets usually have all sorts of fun things that can kill you. Fun is not the word I would use, muttered Sloth. And Bruno? I prompted, curious where this was going. Bruno's sense of smell can detect water from pretty far away, Maya said, patting the dog's head. Dogs can smell water underground in some cases. Plus his behavior changes when he is overheating, which serves as an early warning system that we need to find shade or adjust our activity level. Kessa raised a tentacle hesitantly. But does the dog not require more water than you would, thus making it a liability in water-scarce environments? It was a fair question and I was curious how Maya would respond. That is a valid concern, Maya acknowledged, but the benefits outweigh the costs. Bruno can help hunt for food, which conserves my energy. He can detect threats before I can, which means I am not wasting energy on constant vigilance. And honestly, in a true survival situation, having a companion helps with mental health, which is actually one of the biggest survival factors that most people ignore. Mental health? Prila squeaked. What does mental health have to do with wilderness survival? Maya's expression became more serious. In extended survival situations, isolation and despair kill more people than exposure or starvation. Humans are social creatures. We do not do well alone for long periods. Having Bruno means I have something to care for, something that depends on me, which gives me reason to keep fighting even when things look hopeless. Plus dogs are good at sensing emotional distress and providing comfort. As if on cue, Bruno nuzzled against Maya's leg, and she smiled down at him. The classroom had gone very quiet. I realized that Maya had just articulated something that most survival manuals completely overlooked. The psychological component of survival. That is actually a profound observation, I said slowly. Most survival training focuses exclusively on physical needs. Food, water, shelter, defense. But you are suggesting that emotional resilience is equally critical. Absolutely, Maya confirmed. My dad always said that survival is 90% mental. You can have all the skills and tools in the galaxy, but if you give up hope, none of it matters. Bruno is not just a tool or a weapon. He is a partner. That partnership makes both of us more likely to survive. I made several notes on my data pad. This would definitely be incorporated into future lesson plans. Right then, I said, preparing to move to the next scenario. Let us discuss coastal environments and aquatic survival situations. That was when the emergency alarm started blaring. The entire class froze. Emergency alarms were supposed to be theoretical. They were tested monthly during off hours when no students were present. They were absolutely not supposed to go off during regular class time. Attention all students and faculty, came the automated announcement system. This is not a drill. A containment breach has occurred in Xenobiology Lab 7. All personnel are advised to shelter in place immediately. Lock all doors and await further instructions. Security teams are responding. Repeat. This is not a drill. My chromatic sacs flushed a deep purple of alarm. Xenobiology Lab 7 was 2 floors below us, and containment breaches meant that something potentially dangerous was now loose in the academy. The students erupted into panicked chittering and wailing. Prela immediately dissolved into a puddle of terror. Exloth tried to climb onto his desk. Zinthara's humming became a discordant screech. Maya, I noticed, had gone very still. Her hand had moved to rest on Bruno's head, and the dog had stopped panting, his ears swiveling to track sounds I could not hear. Everyone remain calm, I announced, though my voice betrayed my own anxiety. We will follow protocols. Kessa, seal the door. My teaching assistant rushed to the door controls, but before she could activate them, the door suddenly slid open. Standing in the doorway was Professor Thex, the head of xenobiology. His exoskeleton was cracked in several places, green ichor leaking from wounds on his thorax. His eye stalks were rotating frantically. Need to evacuate, he gasped. The Krelix specimen had escaped. It is aggressive. It is hunting. Krelix? I felt my secondary stomach drop. You mean the apex predator from Krelix Prime? The one with the acid saliva and retractable claws? The one that your department specifically said was safely sedated? Was safely sedated, Professor Thex corrected miserably. It metabolized the sedative faster than expected. It is extremely intelligent and extremely angry. Security cannot get a clear shot without risking students. We need to evacuate this wing. How large is the specimen? Maya asked suddenly, her voice cutting through the rising panic. Professor Thex's eye stalk swiveled to focus on her. Adult male. Approximately 200 kilograms. Why? Just wondering what we are dealing with, Maya said calmly. She stood up, and I noticed she still had her spear. She had been using it as a walking stick after last week's demonstration, and apparently it had become a permanent accessory. You are not dealing with anything, I said firmly. Security will handle this. We just need to get everyone to safety. A scream echoed from somewhere down the hallway. Then another. Then the distinct sound of something large moving very fast. Bruno's hackles raised. A line of fur standing up along his spine. A low growl rumbled from his chest, and Maya's hand tightened on her spear. Everyone get to the back of the classroom, Maya said, her voice taking on a tone of absolute authority. I had never heard from her before. Now, to my surprise, the students obeyed immediately, scrambling over each other to reach the far wall. Even Professor Thex retreated. Only I remained near the front, and Maya grabbed my arm, pulling me back with surprising strength. With respect, Professor, she said quietly. You should probably get back there too. This is my classroom and my students, I protested. I will not hide while something threatens them. Maya looked at me, and for the first time I saw her not as a student but as what she actually was, a human, an apex predator from a Deathworld. A species that had climbed to the top of their planet's food chain through sheer stubborn refusal to be prey. I am not asking you to hide, she said. I am asking you to trust me. Bruno and I, we know how to handle dangerous animals. It is kind of our thing. Before I could respond, the Krelix appeared in the doorway. It was massive, easily the size described, but somehow more terrifying in person. 6 legs ending in razor-sharp claws, an elongated head full of serrated teeth, armored plating covering most of its body, and yes, I could see the acid dripping from its mandibles, sizzling where it hit the floor. Its multifaceted eyes scanned the room, predatory intelligence gleaming in them. It had found a room full of prey. Bruno exploded into barking. a sound so loud and aggressive that several students screamed. The Krelix's attention snapped to the dog, and it hissed, a sound like steam escaping from a ruptured pipe. "Bruno, hold," Maya commanded, her voice sharp. The dog immediately stopped barking but remained in an aggressive stance, his teeth bared, his body coiled and ready. Maya stepped forward, putting herself between the Krelix and the rest of us. She held her spear in a low guard position, the sharpened point angled toward the creature. "Hey there, big guy," she said, her voice conversational. "I know you are probably scared and confused. New environment, strange smells, lots of noise. That is stressful, but these people are not your enemies, and I would really appreciate it if you could turn around and go back to your nice comfortable lab where I am sure someone has prepared a delicious meal for you." The Krelix tilted its head, processing her words. Or maybe just deciding which order to eat us in. "No? Okay then," Maya sighed. Plan B. What happened next occurred so fast that my memory of it remains fragmented even now. The Krelix lunged, impossibly fast for something so large. Maya sidestepped, using her spear to deflect one of its striking claws. The movement was economical, practiced. Bruno darted in from the side, his teeth finding purchase on one of the creature's rear legs. The Krelix shrieked, and tried to spin to face this new threat, but Maya was already moving. She thrust her spear forward, not trying to kill but to control, using the reach of her weapon to keep the creature at bay while Bruno harried its flanks. They were working together, not just two beings in the same space, but a coordinated team. Where Maya drove the creature, Bruno was there to exploit the opening. Where Bruno created a distraction, Maya used the opportunity to gain better position. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. The Krelix swiped at Bruno, nearly catching him, but Maya drove her spear into the joint of its forelimb. Not deep enough to cause serious injury, but enough to make it recoil. The creature rounded on her, mandibles wide, and she actually smiled. "Come on then," she challenged. "Let us see what you have got." The Krelix charged, and Maya planted the base of her spear against the floor, angling it upward. At the last second she dove to the side, and the creature's own momentum carried it onto the spear point. The fire-hardened tip punched through a gap in its armor plating, and the Krelix howled in pain and fury, but it was not a killing blow. Maya had deliberately aimed for a non-vital area. Bruno seized the opportunity, clamping his jaws around one of the creature's eye stalks. Not hard enough to sever it, but enough to cause immense pain and fear. The Krelix thrashed, trying to dislodge both the spear and the dog, but Maya kept the pressure on, using leverage and positioning to control its movements. She was hurting it, I realized, backing it toward the door. "Bruno, release," she commanded, and the dog immediately let go, dancing backward out of reach. The Krelix, now bleeding from multiple wounds, none of them fatal, stared at Maya and Bruno. For a long moment, predator assessed predator, then it turned and fled, limping back down the hallway. Maya calmly pulled her spear free from where it had embedded in the doorframe, checked it for damage, and turned back to face the class. "Everyone okay?" she asked. The classroom erupted. Students were crying, cheering, and in Prila's case reforming from her puddle of terror with visible relief. I found my voice after several attempts. You fought off a Krelix specimen, with a wooden spear and your pet dog." "Well, yeah," Maya said, giving Bruno a vigorous scratch and what appeared to be an entire handful of treats from her pocket. "That is what spears are for, and Bruno is not a pet. He is a working dog. There is a difference. Right, buddy? Who is a good tactical assault canine? You are." "Yes, you are." Bruno's tail wagged so hard his entire back half was wiggling. Security forces arrived moments later, led by Commander Praxis, who took one look at the acid scorches on the floor, the Krelix blood trail, and Maya standing there with her primitive spear, and simply said, "Report." Maya gave a concise tactical summary that would have impressed a military officer. The Krelix's behavior, its vulnerabilities, the nature of its wounds, and its likely location based on the blood trail. Commander Praxis listened, made notes, and then said, "You did well, cadet. That was exceptional threat assessment and response. Have you considered military service?" "Thanks, but I am more interested in xenobiology actually," Maya replied. "Though I guess today was pretty good field research." After security escorted us to a safe zone and medics confirmed that no one was seriously injured, I found myself sitting in the faculty lounge with a strong sedative beverage, trying to process what had just occurred. Kessa sat beside me, equally stunned. "Professor, the human just fought off a Krelix specimen." "A Krelix? With a very well-made stick, I corrected absently. And a highly trained dog. But still, yes, but still. We sat in silence for a moment. Professor Varnix Kessa said slowly, "What would happen if humans ever decided to become a military power in the galaxy?" I thought about Maya standing calm and focused while an armored killing machine charged her. I thought about how she had controlled the situation with nothing but a primitive weapon and a deep understanding of predator behavior. I thought about how she had specifically avoided killing the Krelliks, showing both capability and restraint. I think I said carefully that the galaxy should be very grateful that humans seem to prefer being friends rather than enemies. Kessa's chromatic patches flickered in agreement. Later, after the Academy had returned to some semblance of normalcy and the Krelliks had been recaptured and properly secured, I found Maya in the hallway. She was throwing a ball for Bruno, who was retrieving it with undiminished enthusiasm despite the day's excitement. "Maya," I called out. "A moment of your time." She walked over, Bruno trotting beside her. "What is up, Professor?" "I wanted to thank you," I said, "for protecting the class. It was extraordinary." Maya shrugged. "Just applied the lessons from your survival course. Assess the threat. Use available resources. Maintain tactical advantage. And do not panic." I do not recall teaching the lesson about fighting armored predators with wooden spears. "That was more from my dad," Maya admitted with a grin. "He always said the best survival tool is the one between your ears. Everything else is just backup." Bruno barked, as if agreeing, and Maya laughed. "One more thing," I said. "Your final grade for the weapon construction project. I am giving you the highest marks possible. Not just for the spear itself, but for demonstrating its practical application in a genuine survival scenario." "Thanks, Professor," Maya said. Though honestly, I could not have done it without Bruno. He really is the best weapon a girl could ask for. "Right, boy?" She scratched behind the dog's ears and Bruno leaned into her touch with obvious devotion. As I watched them walk away, human and dog moving in perfect synchronization, I realized something profound. Humans had not conquered their world through superior strength or armor or venom. They had done it through partnerships. With each other, with dogs, with their environment. They had turned cooperation itself into a weapon. And that, perhaps more than any spear or technology, was what made them truly formidable. I returned to my office and began composing a new lecture series titled, "Practical Applications of Partnership in Survival Scenarios." It seemed that my human student had taught me as much as I had taught her, maybe more. The next semester, enrollment in survival tactics tripled. Apparently word had spread about the class where a human fought off a Krellix with a wooden spear. Maya became something of a minor celebrity on campus. Though she seemed mostly bemused by the attention, she continued to bring Bruno to every class. No one complained. In fact, several students requested permission to bring their own companion animals, which led to an interesting series of policy debates in the faculty senate. As for the spear, Maya kept it. Sometimes I would see her in the campus gardens practicing throws, Bruno faithfully retrieving the projectile each time. Primitive technology. Ancient weapons. Old partnerships, but in the hands of a human they remain devastatingly effective. Made another note in my personal log. Humans are not just survivors. They are teachers of survival. Pay attention when they demonstrate their methods. It continues to be excellent advice, and I am very, very glad that Maya Kowalski chose xenobiology over military service. The galaxy is safer for it, though I still confiscate her knife at the beginning of each class. Some protocols must be maintained.